Hello, and a very warm welcome to this webinar hosted by Delta EE. We are really delighted to have so many of you join us today. We have had over 400 registrations, so thank you very much indeed for making the time. Now I can see that there are still some people dialing in, but given we are now past 10 o'clock UK time, I think we will make a start. Today we are focusing on public EV charging. Public charging plays many important roles in the overall EV charging mix. It is essential for those EV drivers that do not have the option to charge at home, for example, if they don't have a driveway or a garage. Rapid and high power chargers give us the confidence that we can recharge relatively quickly while on those longer journeys. And charge at destinations such as supermarkets, cinemas and restaurants give us the opportunity to top up as we go about our day-to-day business. That is, of course, when we are allowed to return to restaurants and cinemas. In this webinar, we will be exploring what the public charging experience is like today for EV drivers, based on the results we have received from our pan-European EV driver survey, and then discussing some of the ways that the eMSPs, that is the mobility service providers, are developing a great experience for their customers. But before I go any further, let me introduce myself and my colleague joining me on the webinar today. So my name is John Murray, and I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague Alex Lewis-Jones.
Hi, John, and hi, everyone.
Hi, Alex, and we can hear you well, so that's fantastic. The technology is working. So just to give a brief bit of background, my role is head of EVs, leading the team of EV experts that we have here at Delta EE, and Alex is the manager of our EV charging service. And all of the content that we present to you during this webinar is taken directly from that service. Okay, let's do some housekeeping before we get fully into the webinar itself. So our intention is to present the content for around about half an hour, and we will then have 5 to 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So we'll finish well within the hour. Throughout the webinar, you are very welcome to ask us questions or comments. So please write those down in the question box and submit those, and we'll come to those at the end, but we might also try and cover some of those questions as we go through the content. The webinar is being recorded and the slides will be sent out afterwards. So yeah, you can watch back at your leisure following today. Right, let's go on to the next slide, Alex. And so this is the agenda. We will give a brief introduction to what we mean by public charging. Then we'll look into the public charging experience today. Then looking at 4 different ways that eMSPs are driving towards a great customer experience, and then that Q&A session at the end. So what do we mean by public charging? So let's first take a step back, even from public, and look at the overall EV charging mix. We've done a lot of work in our EV charging service over the last years to understand the whole charging mix across all the different segments. So we look across public, as well as workplace and home. But given we are looking today specifically at the public charging sector, let's look at those orange boxes. And when we talk about public charging, we focus on 3 different segments. So we look at transit, that is typically the rapid and high power chargers at charging hubs or motorway service stations. We look at destination charging, which is those chargers like the supermarkets and hotels and restaurants and so on. And the 3rd segment is what we call on-street, and that would include the likes of the lamppost charging that we see as a growing segment. So those are the segments, those are the locations that we are referring to when we talk about public charging.
Great, thank you, John. So 2 key roles in public charging that we refer to throughout our research in the service, and what we'll refer to throughout this presentation. I wanted to introduce to you now. The first is the charge point operator. This is a common term used across Europe to explain the party that provides the electricity into the car, so getting the charging service from the energy system into the vehicle. Now, to retail that, there has to be some kind of customer relationship. So this is where the eMobility service provider comes in, or the EMSP. There are a variety of other acronyms used across Europe, but this is our preferred one. And this, like other services such as internet or maybe a mobile phone, these are the service providers providing a variety of different solutions to make sure that the customer can access that charging session. Now, you note that these aren't necessarily separate players. You might have companies operating both of these roles, as that makes sense for them to do so, but they are distinct roles in the eMobility ecosystem. And when we think about that customer experience, we like to think about the customer journey, and that helps us define what kinds of services and products are going to be provided to the EV driver. So the Delta EE approach is to walk through that customer journey. It begins with the location. How do I, as an EV driver, find the public charge points? Then how do I access them? Is that through some form of card or an app or some other method? Then, of course, time elapses during that charging session. What kind of services are there for me that help me know how long it's going to take, or perhaps give me something to do during that period? And finally, as we move into a more of a market approach, there's probably going to be some payment and transaction involved. So how do I pay for this session? We'll be referring to these types of concepts throughout the presentation today.
Thanks very much, Alex. That's a good summary of how we refer to public charging. So let's go straight into the next section. And just to summarize the insights that we've gathered, this is from our annual EV owner survey, something that we do every year. It's a pan-European survey of existing EV drivers, and some of the questions that we ask are listed on this slide. Not an exhaustive list, but here are some of the examples, such as referring to what EV the drivers are using, how long they've had it, when did they purchase it, the extent to which they charge at home, do they have a charge point, things like that. And that helps us to get a really good understanding of the products and services that existing EV drivers are using in the home, but also in the public when they go out to use the public charging infrastructure. So as you can imagine, for this webinar, we're looking at the questions and drilling down into the ones that are focused on that public sector. So let's move on to the next slide, Alex, and over to you to present some of the results from the survey that we conducted last year, just before COVID really hit. So these are, and I think that's actually a really important context. So this is pre-COVID, and so these are perhaps most relevant to when we get back to that sort of post-COVID world, and whenever that might be in the next months.
Yeah, thank you, John. So going through the survey results, one interesting finding we found was an important reminder: not everybody uses public charging today. When you are building up your EV charging strategy, you've got to be aware of what location people want to charge their vehicles. And yeah, when we are asked where people are charging, a significant number said that they don't use public charging at all. And that is to be expected in this stage of the market where we know that home charging dominates so much. You can see the result for Norway there. 44% said that they don't use public charging. We actually found that 41% of Norwegians participating in our survey said that they only ever charge at home. So expect that to evolve as new types of customer come and purchase an EV or purchase a used EV in the years to come. But that is something to be aware of. The next question I wanted to highlight to you, we asked just how do you currently locate public charge points? We commonly think, well, of course, there's lots of public charging apps out there that people will be using, but of course there are actually a variety of ways that people genuinely find where the charge point is. The most commonly selected option here across all of Europe was the internet search. So that's quite a vague term. That could be people saying that they go onto Google on their computer to go and find it, or searching just generally on their phone. At the same time, local knowledge was also a commonly selected option here. Of course, many journeys are conducted where people know where they are going and know what services are around them. So people may well have their preferred charge points, know what they can do there, and have the confidence and comfort of charging at that location. So when we're thinking about what charging services we provide to our customers, it's more than just thinking about the initial location. It might be some more dynamic data that we need to provide on their journey. Now, the next question, John, that we wanted to raise here was about price, and there's been lots in the news about the cost of public charging and how that's increasing. When we asked quite a high level question about how people considered how costly public charging is, overall, people felt that it was a reasonable price that they would be paying. This doesn't differentiate between the different types of charging. We might have some very slow chargers that are still being provided for free, but at the same time, we do have the market moving to very expensive, high-powered charging solutions that do come at more of a premium. Again, Norway, a bit of an outlier here. They are the only market that we found where people are saying that it was more expensive, and we believe one reason could be is around the price of electricity in the home. We know electricity is reasonably cheap in the Nordics compared to other markets, but also that price per kilowatt hour in Norway is especially cheap when you consider the price of public charging, which is largely about the same as the other markets shown here. So quite an interesting dynamic there. The final question we wanted to raise was around problems that people experience. We know that reliability is a key concern for those stakeholders involved in public charging today, and we did find that, well, 73% of EV owners saying that they experience usage problems at least once in that 6-month period. Now, that doesn't sound that common, but when we also look at how frequently people are going to public charge points, actually that frequency could be maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 15 occasions of going to that charge point. We looked at a range of different problems that we're seeing. The most commonly selected option was that they were unable to access the charge point, so issues with your card or key or app, so something between the CPO and the EMSP there. And a range of the other problems are largely to do with how the CPO and the host of the charge points manages that. And I think that's where the market is moving towards, is making alleviating these pain points in some way.
Thanks very much for that, Alex. Yeah, it's a great summary of some of the insights that we gathered during that survey. I think the slide around the perception of the cost and the price of EV charging is a really interesting one, and that's generated 1 or 2 questions that have come in. One around, let me just try and get back to it. There's been a few more that have come in. The perception of EV charging, given that some locations such as supermarkets are actually providing free charging, so the extent to which that could skew the results. which is a really good observation, because there are a lot of charge points that are continuing today to provide free charging. I think the expectation is, of course, that as the market matures, the CPOs will have to generate returns. Of course, a lot of the infrastructure has been subsidized to enable free charging, but that's not a long-term solution. So the free charges will likely be replaced, or fees will come in to use those charges. But nevertheless, I think what a lot of drivers today are doing is comparing the cost of EV charging with the price of refueling conventional ICE vehicles, and in the large majority of cases, on a sort of per mile or per kilometer basis, of course, EV charging is much cheaper. So there is that comparison, I think, that people are continuing to use to decide whether or not EV charging seems to be cheap or fair or expensive relative to what they're used to.
Yeah, John, just on that, non-EV drivers, really interesting question there. And we did do a piece of research in the service a few years ago exploring explicitly the next wave of EV owners, so those who don't own now but expected to own them in the next 3 to 5 years. And when we did a willingness to pay analysis, we found that location was a much more important criteria for them than the price. Some people are more sensitive to the price, but if you have got charging in a convenient location, then people are willing to pay a little bit more for that, for this period of EV adoption anyway. So yeah, interesting one to watch.
Yeah, and another question around, in some cases, seeing very high prices for rapid charging in some locations, more than €1 per kilowatt hour, which is very expensive, I think, and a question about what can the industry do to ensure that there isn't this very high charging where there's areas of limited infrastructure. I guess that's a good question. At this stage of the market growth, of course, there are and will remain for some years yet some sort of blind spots in terms of limited infrastructure. But that's really a question around sort of market dynamics and supply and demand. I mean, I don't know what anyone can do to prevent a CPO or an EMSP from providing or using higher costs, but of course, it's a question of competition and dynamics, and increasingly there'll be more options for customers to go elsewhere. Of course, if prices get too high. But of course, the cost has to be balanced with other factors such as the location, the convenience, the speed. So the price is only one metric that a customer will use before they decide whether or not to use that charging station. Okay, thanks for the questions. Keep them coming in. A few questions around, will the slides be available afterwards? Yes, they will be sent out to all attendees following the webinar. And yeah, the recording will be available as well, I believe, on YouTube in the next day or so as well. Right, so let's move on to the next section, Alex. And this is where we are talking about some of the propositions being developed by the EMSPs. And Alex, you've done some fantastic, very in-depth work looking across hundreds of propositions in Europe. So yeah, please tell us more about the research you've done.
Yeah, thanks, John. And yeah, likewise, thanks for the questions. We'll try and cover as many of those either through the next section or at the end in the Q&A. So one thing our EV charging service subscribers have been asking us about for the last 9 months or so has been around the evolution of the EMSP role. We know that there are lots of different EMSPs, lots of different players offering solutions across this customer journey, that location, access, time, and cost. So we consider anyone who is offering solutions in any of these spaces to be offering an EMSP proposition. So as a result, we have considered over 360 propositions from over 100 EMSPs, and that's across 12 different host markets in Europe. Of course, many of their propositions are transboundary too. there's an awful lot we can say here, but I just wanted to pull out 4 steps that we see the market innovating to create a great customer experience in this space. So step 1 is digital integration. The first takeaway here was that across all of those EMSPs, 72% have their own mobile phone app. That's a lot of apps out there, and we're aware that there are other ways of accessing charge points. The RFID card has been the predominant method, but either combinations of card plus app or just the app now are becoming more prevalent. And this brings in an interesting question of, is eMobility becoming digital, or is the EMSP just getting integrated into other digital services that already exist? To illustrate this, we've created this bubble diagram for you. So every single bubble that you see on the screen right now is a different app that we have seen in the European market. The size represents how many downloads that we observed on Android Play as of February, so 2 months ago now, and the color denotes who the parent company of that particular app or brand is. So that kind of light peachy orange color you can see there is electrical utilities, and that was the most common sector who was seeking to be building and putting out brands of app on that we could see on Android Play. So just to go through some examples here, the ones that have over 1 million downloads, there's 3 in the middle there. Tesla, of course, is quite a well-known car brand, and actually this app is for a variety of services for Tesla owners, not exclusively around public charging. However, because they do offer this public charging service through that app, we consider that to be offering an EMSP service, which is competing with others on that bubble diagram. Waylet is a brand from the Spanish fuel retailer Repsol, and this is actually more of a broader retail brand. So I can use my loyalty points via this app for purchasing at high street stores in Spain, such as El Corte Inglés or other similar stores. At the same time, I can locate and use Repsol's public charging CPO via this app. So again, it's a way of integrating public charging services into other digital retail. The third one there is PlugShare, and that very much is a pure EMSP play. It's very transboundary, and adds another question in that it's heavily based in the US. So with this multinational nature of the EMSP, how global or how transboundary do we need to look when, if you're building up your EMSP strategy, you want to start thinking about things like market share? It's a very mixed landscape. Now, John, you came across some exciting news overnight, I understand. Do you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah, well, that's right, Alex. Yeah, a really last-minute addition to this slide set with the news this morning that Netflix has launched their own public charging proposition. They will be providing free access to public charging for their customers, and will be producing dedicated content for EV drivers. I understand 20-minute short movies to watch and chill at charging stations while your EV is getting topped up. So yeah, a lot of move in this sector, a lot of new entrants, and yeah, as you can tell from this graphic, a lot of competition for the EV customer for sure. So I think we're moving on now to our poll, just to break it up a little bit, just so we keen to get some interaction from you, the listeners. So we're going to ask a question: if the EMSP is to become more integrated into other sectors, which is the best place to deliver this customer experience. So let's just get this poll launched. Hopefully you can see that coming up onto your screens now. So we'll give you 30 seconds to consider the question and the 4 possible answers, which are the electrical utilities, tech companies, fuel retailers, the automotive OEMs, or other B2C retail sectors. You can see that the answers are already starting to come in, so thank you for that. So we'll give you another 20 seconds or so to consider, and then we'll close the poll and then publish the results. I can see that 60% so far of the attendees have voted. We'll just give you a few more seconds. 70%. If any of you that are sitting on the bench, now's your chance to pin your colours to the mast. Let's get your responses in. Okay, we'll close in 3, 2, 1. That's a minute. Okay, let's close the poll and let's publish the results. Here they are. So 30% of our listeners suggesting that the electrical utilities, the energy companies are best positioned to deliver this public charging experience, 22% the tech companies, 16% fuel retailers, and 12% both for the auto OEMs and other sectors. So what can we glean from this? No massive winner, but I guess you could argue that the electrical utilities, over a third of the vote, well positioned. They've got existing customer relationships. They have already launched, many of them, their own propositions, so perhaps they are best placed. But of course, you know, a lot of move perhaps from the tech companies as well.
Yeah, really interesting one to see there, John. I think broadly that represents the share of different types of how many MSPs there are from these different sectors for electrical utilities and fuel retailers. We're seeing, you know, quite a few saying tech. So there is this question around the likes of Google and their presence already in providing a lot of the services that go behind the eMSP, i.e. the map and navigation services. So it'd be interesting to see how that evolves. Great.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. And conscious of time, so let's move on to the next few slides.
Okay. So next step was around roaming. Now, obviously, providing as many charge points as the customer wants and needs is an important factor here. So this is another thing that we looked at when we considered each eMSP's approach. We have created this graph here, and we've seen kind of different clusters of types of eMSP approaching how they or the size of the network that they are advertising to their customers. So at the top, we've got the roaming champions. So I put in a couple of logos there. These are the ones who typically have that multinational eMSP approach, but they might be coming from different backgrounds. BMW charging is a good example of some of the work that digital charging solutions are doing with various automotive brands to provide a multinational solution across the whole of Europe and boasting the largest networks. Equally, we see Shell doing a lot of this as well through their own acquisition, New Motion, that has been building up their own eMSP presence for many years. And then there are some pure eMSP players that you may not have heard of, but actually have a lot of coverage in terms of how many charge points they have available. So Next Charge is one to look up. It's an Italian brand, but has good coverage across all of Europe. There's a section in the middle here that I call Germany Plus, because in Central Europe, around Germany and neighboring countries, there is a more market maturity around roaming. And that enables lots of different players to very quickly add tens of thousands of charge points to their roaming proposition. I've put the German utilities Mangau and eMobility as two particular players who are capturing a lot of customers outside of their region, or indeed outside of Germany too, because of the proposition they put forward. And ADAC, the equivalent for a German roadside response service. Conversely, we do see isolated markets that don't have such market maturity with roaming. So, looking at the UK and Norway, where there's not so much roaming, there are fewer charge points available on the EMSPs provided today, but also national EMSPs focus very much on what they can do internally. So that's where ZapMap and the Norwegian EV Association are providing services. At the bottom there, we do see a lot of these non-roamer CPOs. So they are involved in roaming, and many are involved in being available on the EMSPs further up the graph here. However, for their own customer solution, they're more focused just making sure that all their customers can get access to their own charge points. So there's no incentive for building up their own EMSP beyond their own CPO. Okay, step 3, consistency of tariff. There's quite a few dynamics here, and we've looked at the whole market for tariffs, and it is quite confusing, but I'll try and go through how we've seen this break down over this slide. So, first of all, there's a variety of different fee categories. First of all, we've got the contract. So this is the one-off or recurring fees that are required when you are public charging. Then for each session, there is of course a fee to the charge point operator. These come in a variety of different ways today. So it might be per connection, or for the time that you're using, so per minute, or it might be for the energy consumed per kilowatt hour. Now, it might stop there, or if the EMSP separates out its own margin on top of the session fee that might be going to the CPO, then we see an additional fee added on top, and we call this the service fee. And broadly, it will marry to the types of fee that you'd expect to pay for the session, so connection, per minute, and per kilowatt hour. Okay, so if you're still with me, we then see 3 different products available across the market. So pay as you go, subscriptions, and prepaid credit. Now, each type of proposition could be bundling up different parts of these fees together. And when we looked across all of it, we found that there were 54 unique tariff structures across Europe. This in itself is a bit baffling and quite confusing if you're planning your European road trips and have to access that. However, the way that roaming propositions are being built and the way that the market is starting to standardize, we do see more and more pay-as-you-go per kilowatt hour being the standard and preferred approach. But there are battles here between what is transparent and what is the best cost to the customer, and what is also convenient to the customer. So some EMSPs want to provide a range of different options, including a subscription, including as a pay-as-you-go, because people have different needs. So getting towards that standardization and that consistency in approach is what we need towards getting a quality customer experience. Okay,
I guess one of the takeaway from that slide, Alex, isn't it, that the tariff structure across different propositions is complex. There's 54 different structures, and yeah, the work that you've done is trying to kind of simplify that down to this kind of this table structure, and this is what you've done really as part of the analysis for our subscribers. So if anyone's got any sort of questions or want to drill down into this a bit more, then please feel free to reach out to Alex or myself afterwards, and we can go through this in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I completely agree that in our report, we go into detail about different approaches that we see MSPs taking to this space too. But yeah, just to finish off before we go into the Q&A, the final step is just creating those enhanced features for specific customers. Various areas of innovation happening with public charging services at the moment. Again, coming back to our customer journey, some services are pivoting around the elements of predictive navigation and charging optimization. Thinking about some of those problems we saw in the first part of the presentation, how can we alleviate that, avoid queues, and provide a quality service to the customer? There are lots of players targeting this, and at the same time, that enables the EMSP to perhaps decide where the EV driver goes and charges. So that provides a lot of power to the EMSP against the CPO. And for access and cost pain points, we are starting to see increased interest in putting services through the car computer itself. So this car wallet authorization and billing integration solutions are increasingly being sought after, and we expect to see more of these being launched by automotive brands in the coming years. And of course, we're not all the same customer. Lots of innovators are focused on solutions specifically for fleets that have particular business needs that are separate to the private customer market. So can we build a customer journey which is specific for that type of solutions? Expect to see many players entering that space too. Okay, that's everything from me, John. I'll pass back to you for the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alex. A lot to mull over there. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of players doing different things, and yeah, a lot of change and innovation to come in the years ahead, I imagine. And we've got a number of questions coming in, which we will come to very shortly. But just wanted to provide a few slides or a couple of slides on who we are, Delta. I think most of you will be familiar at least with who we are, but just to say that all of the content presented during this webinar has come directly from our EV charging service. This is an ongoing subscription-based research service providing content across the European landscape for EV charging. In this session, of course, we have touched upon that second pillar, looking at public, but we are also looking at the other segments, including home, fleets, smart charging. Our research is built upon both quantitative data, a lot of data around market sizing and forecasts, and qualitative insights that we get through speaking with the market on an ongoing basis. And of course, you've seen some of the results that we've collected from our customer research, where we've been surveying existing EV drivers. European coverage, and we're really proud of the support that we are delivering to our customers on an ongoing basis. And those are just some of the testimonials that we received over the last months from our existing subscribers. So these are two of the reports. These are the two reports that the content that we presented today came from. The first of which published towards the end of last year with the results from the EV customer survey. And the second one, which is talking about the work that Alex has led on the EMSPs, so how is public charging retailed across Europe. This is a report that our subscribers will be receiving in the next week or so. And hello to all the subscribers that we've got attending the webinar today. So you will get access to the full details of that research in the next days ahead. So thank you very much for your attention. If you want to get in touch on anything that we have covered today, then please feel free to reach out. Or if you'd like to learn more about how our EV charging service can benefit you, you can also visit our website, and we have our ongoing Talking New Energy podcast. I think it's now into series 9, and that's been a great way for us to engage with the new energy sector and engage with leading edge actors across the whole of the new energy sector. So please feel free to have a look at that, listen to that on all the best podcast platforms. Right, let's head over to the questions. And there's been quite a few that have come in. We just need to try and go through those. Any, Alex, that have caught your eye while I've been talking over the last minute or two?
Huge amount of questions. Thank you so much. One thing I'll do is if we don't get to answer your question today, we'll try and get back to you directly because they're all really interesting points. One here is, do you expect there to be significant changes around tax which will impact upon overall public charging kilowatt hour costs in the coming years as revenues from liquid fuels reduces? Yeah, really important point there around policy. It hasn't been the focus of our EMSP research, but we are very aware that different markets, different governments are looking at what that means in terms of the switch from liquid fuel to electric fuel. But one other thing around that we're especially aware of is around making sure that it's a fair price for the customer too. Do we put a cap or a ceiling or a floor on the price of charging? That a lot of it leads to that per kilowatt hour standardization as the fairest and clearest, transparent way that we can pay for public charging. In the UK, we know there's lots of conversations around switching the taxation to perhaps taxing per use of the road rather than for the fuel that you are consuming. Honest opinion is that these are still quite early days for all markets in terms of switching away from the liquid fuel tax, because it's still going to be a long time until we see the majority of vehicle journeys being carried out by electric mobility. But the conversations are going ahead. I do think that tax will play a role, but I'm kind of thinking 2030s is when that's going to be more of a consideration for your EMSP proposition.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. And I don't know if you can still hear me, but I had a couple of connectivity issues there, so I think I dropped out for a second. But can you hear me okay just now?
Yeah, we can hear you fine now, John.
Okay, good. Panic over. Right, thanks for that. There's a question around, well, like paraphrase, it's really about plug and charge, ISO 15118. What are our thoughts on that? Yeah, it's often talked about, came on to everyone's radar, I think 2 or 3 years ago with great excitement, and essentially I think this will become one of the de facto standards, which will be omnipresent, I think, across the industry, both within the chargers and the vehicles, which essentially will provide a number of functions, but one of which will enable the EMSP contracts, if you like, to be within the car, and will negate the need to have an RFID card or to access charging via an app on your phone. It will enable the car to communicate directly with the charger to start the charge. And the question is, do we expect that to be the norm? And if so, when do we think it will happen? I mean, it's a really good question. I think our view, or certainly my view, and Alex, you may want to say a few words on this as well, is that this will become standard in the years ahead. Whether that's in the next 2 or 3 years or 5 years, who knows? But it's on everyone's radar, and there's a great opportunity, I think, for the standard to really help the customer journey in terms of providing ease and efficiency, by allowing the cars to communicate directly with the charge points. So yeah, I think it is something that is coming, and will have a very big impact when it does finally get rolled out en masse.
Yeah, I think I agree. And for people building the propositions, the key question is, do I know that I'm going to have volumes of customers using a particular technology set? And when you have things like 15118, there's a bit of uncertainty about, is this going to be common across all brands, all marks of car? And if you don't have that certainty, then you're more wanting to target, closer to 100% of the potential EV audience, rather than just a fraction of that. And that can be a problem for not seeing so many propositions coming early into the market for that.
Yeah. And of course, an alternative to that and to these eMSP contracts is the contactless payments, whereby you can pay with your debit or credit card at the charging station, like we do when we go to do our shopping at the supermarket. And that is something which will also have a role to play. And of course, it's been mandated in certain countries that chargers will have this functionality. So to some extent, that will come down to customer choice and preference. May also come down to the technology that people have, both within their vehicles and at the charging station that they charge at. So it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, I'm very conscious that I didn't mention that at all in the eMSP presentation, purely because it's kind of a way of bypassing a lot of the eMSP propositions, and it can be a threat to a lot of those who've been building up their own payment solutions. But I think this builds into that broader question of where do we see EV charging sitting? Is it going to be its own field like fuel retail is today, or actually is it going to be integrated into other services? I think banking retail is undergoing slowly but now quickly a lot of digital innovation that's going to make traditional payment methods a lot more accessible and a lot more user friendly. So that could provide a challenge to the eMSP role. At the same time, Google, you've got Maps, you've got Google Pay, and they've got more customers than there are EVs on the planet. So there's kind of a lot of challenges to people entering this space for eMSPs.
Let's finish up with this question, which I think is a really good question, which is, do you think dynamic or time of use public charging pricing is likely? So my interpretation of this question is essentially at different times of day or at periods of high demand, EV charging prices will fluctuate. So at high demand and popular times of day, then you'll pay more for your charging or pay for cheaper charging rates, perhaps overnight, or where there's less demand for the charging. Now, that's my interpretation of the question. I think it's a great question. And yeah, I guess the answer is who knows exactly, but I think that those sorts of propositions surely will come through to some extent. Will they become the norm in the years ahead, whereby there is that supply and demand and the pricing reflects that? Who knows? I think partly what has to happen here, there are certain fixed costs for charging, both in terms of the infrastructure and the electricity. But on the energy side, we're looking a lot at smart charging and time of use tariffs coming through for the price you pay for electricity at different times of day. And I think it would make a lot of sense to apply that same logic and thinking to the use of public charging. And yeah, if propositions like that can be made to work on a commercial basis and can influence where and when EV drivers charge, both in terms of congestion on the charging infrastructure itself, but also congestion on the energy grid, then I think that could have a benefit both in terms of the price and convenience that we are all as EV customers paying in terms of when we charge our vehicles. So it's a really good question.
Yeah, just on that, I think it is a really interesting area, and I think there's an opportunity to partner and have dialogue between those who are working in smart energy and flexibility with those who are leading a lot of the innovation in more mobility sectors like parking, because there's already a lot of thinking going on here around, can I create dynamic tariffs for parking due to congestion, or how do I spread where vehicles go across my city? There could be a really interesting parallel here. Interesting case study would be I think it's called the Vulcan car park in Oslo, where the providers there have created dynamic tariffs depending on the time of day, how many other people are charging at the, I think, 100 charge points they have at that location, and varying the prices depending on if you want a fast charge, well, you're going to have to pay for that at a premium. If you're willing to trickle charge and go for a longer time, then you'll pay much less for that. The key thing is for policymakers is that they want to make this transparent for the customer. They don't want to confuse them. And is the customer the best person to be making these decisions? As we see with smart energy, it might be some smart technology that makes that decision for you. And that's where we're seeing these navigational optimization solutions coming in and saying, actually, yeah, we've talked to the talked to all the car parks in your city. This is the location you should go to for the best price and for that particular grid requirement at this time.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Alex. So we're over time, so I think we better wrap it up there. Just to say that well done to those of you who spotted the April Fool's joke during the course of this webinar. If Netflix do decide to offer EV charging as part of their customer experience, then you can say that you heard it here first. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it's been useful. Please feel free to get in touch with Alex or myself if you've got any questions. Yeah, hopefully we'll see you all again sometime soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, bye-bye.
Bye.